inspiring Uganda. For those who are joining us online, welcome, and the hashtag we will use is a hashtag SpotLightUG, and you can also follow us on our different social media platforms, but also you can as well stream live online on the Afro mobile app on your Android. Whether you're using Android, can get it on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, and that is as well promoting Ugandan content, getting over 14 television stations, local TVs, and over 40 radio stations. Tonight, we will be focusing on the tourism sector, like I did say much earlier on. My name is Mildred Tohaise, and I introduce to you our first panelist for the night, and this is...
Doreen Silva Katusime, also known as Mama Tourism, is the Permanent Secretary and Accounting Officer of the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities since 2016. Before she joined the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Doreen Silva worked in the Ministry of Education and Sports for 3 years and the Ministry of East African Community Affairs for 7 years as the Under Secretary. Doreen also worked in the Ministries of Health, Education and Sports, Commerce, Cooperatives and Marketing, and in the Ministry of Natural Resources as Principal Personal Secretary, Senior Assistant Secretary and Social Secretary at the State House Entebbe, attached to the Office of the First Lady. Doreen Silva Katusime holds a master's degree in management studies from the Uganda Management Institute, a postgraduate diploma in public administration from Makerere University, and the Uganda Management Institute, a certificate in law for administrative officers at Law Development Center, and a Bachelor of Arts honors with a concurrent diploma in education from Makerere University.
And thank you very much, the Permanent Secretary to the Ministry. Thank you for sparing time to be with us. You can say hello to our viewers. Good evening to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mildred. Good evening, viewers.
It's a pleasure, and of course we'll be getting to know from the Ministry where we are currently, especially after that beating from the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still on, but of course life has to move on. Our second panelist for the night is none other than...
Samuel John Mwanda is the Executive Director of Uganda Wildlife Authority. Over the last 27 years, Sam has worked in the field of nature resource conservation and wildlife management. A graduate of forestry, Sam was recruited to work with Uganda National Parks in 1994 to help rehabilitate the degraded Mount Elgon and Chivale National Parks. In 2000, he was transferred to the Uganda Wildlife Authority headquarters to work in the planning unit, which he later headed. Sam has also headed the Conservation Department as Director. Sam had a stint as Executive Secretary of the Greater Virunga Transboundary Collaboration Secretariat and Country Representative of the African Wildlife Foundation in Uganda.
And it's a pleasure having you, Mr. Mwanda. You can say hello to our viewers.
Hello, viewers. Have a good evening to you. Thank you, Mildred.
It's a pleasure having you, and there is a lot to discuss about the beauty of Uganda. We'll move on to our next panelist, who is...
Hoho Kakoza is an adept tourism professional and entrepreneur with over 22 years experience working at different levels. Starting her travel industry career in 1999 as General Manager of Express Travel Group, or American Express in Uganda, she is now the Managing Director of Uganda Travel Bureau and reverted into office this month as the Chairperson of the Uganda Association of Travel Agents, Tugata. UTB 2004 Limited is the oldest travel company in Uganda with 50 years of experience in travel and tourism. Over the years, PAL has served the tourism private sector in different capacities and now at the highest level as the President of the Uganda Tourism Association, UTA. UTA is the apex umbrella body of the private sector in tourism that advocates for a better tourism business environment that fosters investments and growth of the industry. Owing to her experience and position in Uganda, Ms. Pearl Hoho Kakoza represents Uganda on the revived East Africa Tourism Platform, EATP. Pearl and her company UTB 2004 Limited is an accredited member of several professional bodies in the travel industry like IATA, among others.
For starters, I refrained from mentioning Pearl's second name because I didn't want to just say it wrong. But who better to discuss the beauty of the Pearl of Africa than Pearl herself? It's a pleasure having you. Hello to our viewers.
Thank you very much. Good evening, viewers. Thank you, Mildred.
A pleasure having you, Pearl. Let's move on to our next panelist, who is...
Dr. James Musinguzi is the Executive Director, Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, UWEC, a role he has held for 11 years. Dr. Musinguzi, in his role, leads one of the region's major wildlife centers, covering 72 acres and with an animal collection of over 300, the majority of which arrive orphaned, injured or rescued and are placed under rehabilitation. He also chairs the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquaria, PAZA, and the Board of Trustees Chimpanzee Trustee, Ngamba Island. Dr. Musinguzi holds a Doctorate of Management, an MBA majoring in Strategic Management, and a Masters of Sciences in Conservation Biology.
From what many of us knew as the zoo, it has now expanded to more than just a zoo. It's a pleasure having you, Dr. James Musinguzi. Say hello to our viewers.
Thank you very much, Mildred. It's a pleasure being here. Good evening, viewers.
Good evening to you. We'll discuss much more than a zoo. Now that it's no longer just a zoo, can we have more zoos? Probably in the different areas of Uganda. And last but not least is our next panelist, who is...
Lily Ajarova is the Chief Executive Officer, Uganda Tourism Board, UTB. Ajarova is a tourism expert and a passionate conservationist. She has been recognized for contributing to Uganda's economic development through tourism, marketing and wildlife conservation and management. A recipient of, among others, the prestigious National Golden Jubilee Award, Tourism Excellence Award, Wildlife Conservation Award, Top Africa 100 Women in Travel, Africa's Most Influential Women in Business and Government, Ajarova has also provided leadership as a member on the advisory committee of the Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, PASA, who developed policies, standard operating procedures and best practices for the 22 sanctuaries and wildlife centers in 13 African member countries of PASA.
Ladies and gentlemen of huge CVs right here to discuss tourism. Lily, say hello to our viewers before we kickstart the discussion.
Thank you, Mildred. Good evening, viewers. It's a great pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to have you too. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sparing time off this night, past curfew time, to be here to discuss the beauty of Uganda. Not just the beauty, but how we can be able to tap from its potential for economic development of our country, but also for the development of the citizens, because they directly and indirectly do gain from the tourism sector. In no particular order, let me start off with the permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Doreen Silva Katsime. Let's take a look at the tourism industry and the ministry in itself, what your mandate is, where you are right now, and probably some of the prospects of the ministry with regard to tourism, because this is a time where everyone is thinking what next for an industry that has been hit, I think, the most by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Mildred. First of all, I would like to say it's a great pleasure for me to be here. And I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in, both at NBS and UBC, and everyone that is following us live. The Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities is responsible for formulating and implementing policies, programs, strategies, plans that promote tourism and wildlife and cultural heritage conservation. And as a ministry, we are responsible basically for those three areas. So sometimes the antiquities confuses some people, but that is about cultural heritage really. So when we talk about conservation, most times people only think about the wildlife, but we conserve cultural and wildlife heritage. So that's basically the mandate of the ministry. And as a ministry, we are responsible for policy, for regulation, but we have agencies, and that's why we're here with Uganda Tourism Board, Uganda Wildlife Authority, Uganda Wildlife Education Center, because those agencies then implement the policies. They are the arms of the ministry that are responsible for implementation. Now, coming back to your question, COVID, I can ably say that it has hit the sector the hardest, because the sector that's responsible for hospitality, for tourism, once you have lockdowns, there is lockdown, there is no travel, there is no hospitality, the hotels are closed. That was a big hit on the sector. Before COVID, like you said earlier in your introduction, the sector was bringing in the highest foreign exchange earner at about 1.6 billion. It was contributing about 9% to the GDP. It was creating over 600,000 jobs. But we as a ministry did a survey last year in 2020 to assess the effects of COVID, and it was quite disheartening. We noted about a loss of about $1 billion US, wow, a loss of jobs of over 450,000 jobs lost in the sector, reduction of numbers of people visiting the national parks, which is the biggest source of revenue for the sector, and so on and so forth. I may not enumerate all of them. However, we are hopeful because the sector is beginning to recover. Now, once the lockdowns were lifted, now the vaccine has come, we are beginning to see a bit of recovery in the sector. We are beginning to see visitors coming in. But even more importantly, one of the positive effects of COVID, I could say, was that the Ugandans are beginning to visit Uganda more. So we have noted a rise in the numbers of Ugandans visiting the different tourist sites, especially during the last quarter of last year. We are just about to do another survey to see the recovery and what the status is at this point in time. But we are hopeful that maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, we will have recovered.
Okay. Well, I'll be coming back to you, definitely. It was a blessing in disguise, and I almost said, is it because probably Ugandans had no choice to fly out that they decided to visit? But it is still a very good point, and I think they are appreciating what the country has. But probably before I move on to the next panelist, you talked about the cultural heritage preservation. Someone out there is thinking for cultural preservation is more about just the communities and how they've passed on this cultural, norms and values over to the descendants or to the next generations. How then does government come in the conservation?
Now, the interesting thing about culture, and especially when you come up to the Ministry of Tourism, there are two aspects of culture. There's what is called the tangible aspects and the intangible aspects. What you're talking about are mainly the intangible aspects. Okay. Now, the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities is mainly responsible for the tangible aspects. So that's why the museums, for example, fall under the ministry. So we take care of the preservation, conservation of the tangible aspects, the artifacts. So if you go to the Uganda Museum, you will see the life in Uganda, starting from the Stone Age to the discovery of oil. So that is basically what we try to conserve, the tangible aspects, and then the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is responsible for the other aspects of culture. But of course we work closely together to promote both cultures. There are many people who want to visit Uganda, not just to look at the wildlife, but want to come and understand the culture of the people, how we live, our music, our art, our food, all that are aspects of culture.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I'll be getting back to you. Let me come to Dr. James Musinguzi. For me, when you talk about work, my memory is the zoo that I first visited while I was in primary school, traveling from Masindi, excited about coming to Kampala, that I am going to visit animals in the zoo. Slowly and steadily, there has been a metamorphosis into what we now call the Wildlife Education and Conservation Center. What exactly is your mandate? Because for many people out, it's about you keeping animals, and that is it. Feed them, we come and see them, and that's the end of it. Is that so?
Thank you very much, Mildred, for that great question. That's not so. Like you've said, it's been an incredible journey. The zoo that started in 1952 has been transformed over the years. In the 60s, it became a traditional zoo until 94, when it became the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, mainly with mandates such as conservation education mainly dwelling on environmental education and education for sustainable development. And this is done at Entebbe, but also using an outreach approach where we go to schools out there and communities to try and create awareness about the value of conserving biodiversity. The other mandate is rescue, rehabilitation, and release of wildlife. There are so many wildlife species that are entangled in human-wildlife challenges like trafficking, wildlife trafficking, poaching, some of these animals that are actually confiscated on their way when they are being smuggled out of the country, but also around protected areas, working with our partners, the Uganda Wildlife Authority. We rescue them, bring them to UWEC, and rehabilitate them. We have about 3 doctors who are stationed to look after these animals. Once they are rehabilitated and they feel they are fit to be reintroduced back into the wild, we take them back. Those which cannot stay at the center, and they act as ambassadors for those which are in the wild, but also they act as conservation education. The center acts as a laboratory where you have live species that are used for education. The third mandate is captive breeding of endangered wildlife species. We have endangered wildlife species that need to be bred so that we have a backstop or an insurance population that can be reintroduced in case we have a challenge in the wild. And right now we're actually trying to put up a biobank so that we can bank our genes of the wildlife that we have. The other one is recreation. While undertaking or going through conservation education, it's important that someone also goes through recreation. So recreation is part of the social amenities that supports the education that we do offer. And as a way of displaying Uganda's wildlife, the center has been themed using the ecosystem approach of Uganda. All the ecosystems of the country are there, so the center is acting as a window on Uganda and a gateway on Uganda. So you're able to make a decision which wildlife area to visit because the exhibits have been themed basing on Uganda's wildlife areas, the national parks. The animals that are in the parks are representative there. So the zoo or the center is acting as a marketing tool for Uganda's national parks, because you can make a decision after seeing a sample of the animals, the plants, and the life, because every exhibit has the enormous information about the various national parks that are represented at the zoo. So yes, those are the 3 mandates, but also acting as a window on Uganda, where it's a gateway. Somebody who flies into the country is able to make a decision after reaching there which national park to visit, but also somebody who could be going out and could have missed a particular signature species in the wild is able to see this while at the center flying out of the country.
Okay, about how many animal species are we talking about? Do we have all those in the national parks at UWEC, or there are just some that you talk about in theory and they're not present at UWEC?
Thank you very much. We have 300 animal individuals representing over 53 species.
Okay.
Of course, the animals are classified. We have primates, reptiles, amphibians, but in total we have 300 individuals categorized in 53 species of animals in the country. Of late, we imported the tigers, which last existed in this country in the 70s. They have added onto our collection, and this is a new product that is actually promoting more of domestic tourism now that we are in COVID-19, and so that is the collection that we have: 300 individuals, 53 species.
Okay.
But like we continue to rescue because it is unprecedented. Sometimes you don't plan for the rescue because you just get a call using our ambulance, you go and pick the animal. So tomorrow, don't be surprised for me to tell you that we have 302 individuals. Yes, but at the moment, 300 individuals, categorized in 53 species.
You actually have an ambulance that picks up these animals, so wherever someone is in Uganda, they can be able to access it? Is that what you're saying? And how do they get in touch?
Yes, we do have an animal ambulance, and of course we are building capacity to acquire more, because the challenge is quite bigger. One ambulance is not enough, but as we grow, we are going to acquire more. And what happens is that if somebody rescues an animal, he calls the center, and then our team swings in action immediately to go and pick up this animal wherever it is, so that it is brought to the care of the veterinarians, the specialists, the animal caregivers, who then assess the state of this animal and determine what intervention must be done for the animal to survive,
Okay.
because we must keep these animals alive for the flourishment of our tourism sector.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Msinguzi. I'll be coming back to you. The other question someone out there is asking what sort of animal. Some of us have phobia for snakes. I see a small snake and I'll call Uwek, please come and take this one up. But let me go to the Uganda Wildlife Authority, Mr. Samwanda. Let's speak about your mandate and how far you are going with ensuring that you work through that.
Thank you, Mildred. Uganda Wildlife Authority was set up as a merger of the former Uganda National Parks and the Game Department in 1996. But when we talk wildlife conservation, it began in the early 20s, during the time the colonialists were around, when they set up the first wildlife reserves. Our major mandate is to ensure that we have wildlife, that it is protected in the country, that it is available for people to see in the natural environment. So ideally you go to a park and you find an elephant or a lion or a gorilla, and we ensure that those are available to be seen. And then we, in those areas where we are keeping them, we ensure that those who want to visit are able to visit. So we create tracks, we provide accommodation so that they can stay for the night, and then work with the communities that neighbor them, because wildlife doesn't know boundaries. It can get out, so we work with the communities that neighbor them so that they appreciate that this is a resource for them that they need to protect. And as we work towards ensuring that the wildlife is protected, if it gets out, we also work in a way to get the wildlife back into the parks. The other aspect is to...
Maybe I'll just continue kindly.
Yes.
If you could have your mic lifted up. Exactly, please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. The other aspect that we do deal with is to reduce, if possible, eliminate illegal wildlife trade, because we have people who go hunting, they get trophies or they get meat, or they even capture live animals, as Dr. Msinguzi has already mentioned, and we try to prevent that happening. But if it happens, we follow them up and we get them arrested and arraigned in courts of law. So we do that protection to ensure that the wildlife numbers remain. I can probably just mention that over the last 30 or so years, we have seen the wildlife numbers that had completely dropped to almost zero, growing quite tremendously. Mountain gorillas from about 300, we have over 500 in the country. That sounds small, but the fact that mountain gorillas are only found in 3 countries and they're just above 1,000, meaning Uganda has a minimum of 50% of that number, means a great deal for us. Uganda Cob, that were around 40,000 in 1985, we now count over 110,000. Elephants that were about 1,000, we count over 6,000. So when you look at the numbers, we are already doing a tremendous job to ensure that this wildlife is kept for the people of Uganda.
All right, actually, now that you talked about the fact that we have these numbers growing,
Yes.
and yet there is the mobility aspect of the animals and the
Yes.
birds flying and the animals crossing, and when we get to look at our boundaries or borders, they are not physical as per se, they are perceived, because this is what the colonialists did. How are we dealing with the crisscrossing of part of what we would call our, animals, belonging to us as Uganda and our neighbors? How do we deal with those crisscrossing movements?
What we do have is an arrangement with our neighboring countries to ensure that, you see, the wildlife, actually even people shouldn't have boundaries, I should say. But they don't take boundaries as a necessity. And so they move looking for food, looking for water, looking for mates. And as they do this, when they're at the boundary, and incidentally several of our national parks are at the boundary, they cross into the neighboring countries. But there is an international agreement that if this wildlife crosses into another country, that country where it has crossed protects it where it is. So we work with the other countries to ensure that that is done. You probably heard that I used to work with the Greater Virunga Transboundary Collaboration.
Yes.
That was an arrangement between Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we were working along the boundaries to ensure that all the three countries are working together to protect the wildlife, but also to support the communities neighboring these protected areas to have a better livelihood. So the arrangements are there, they are international, and all countries have signed to them. So there is no problem whether an elephant crosses into DRC, as long as DRC is willing and ready to protect it, which they are.
Okay. Thank you very much. I thought at one point in time you were going to say when they cross over, the country should send them back at some point in time. But we'll be discussing more about that later on. Crossing over to the Uganda Tourism Board. Of course, for many, when you mention Uganda Tourism Board, Lily, because of the word tourist, we're looking at, just people coming in the country, or just even the local, tourists being able to visit the different areas, like the Permanent Secretary said. Let's take a look at the Uganda Tourism Board mandate and where exactly you are in ensuring that that mandate comes to life.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Uganda Tourism Board, UTB, is mandated to promote Uganda as a preferred destination to the domestic market and the international markets. And we do this in partnership with the private sector and the developmental partners as well. And the key aspect of our mandate is, one, to promote and market Uganda as a preferred destination. Two, to set standards within the services in tourism and the facilities. And we do this through training, grading and classification of the accommodation facilities. We promote investment in tourism for employment. We do promote tourism for education and research, and also training of all the various players along the tourism value chain. Our job is to ensure that Uganda is favorably promoted as a destination, and also ensure that it translates into economic development and transformation through increase in GDP, employment, providing employment to Ugandans, and bringing in foreign exchange earning for the economy. We do this through a variety of ways. We have strategic programs such as domestic tourism campaign. This is basically targeting the domestic market. We also, for the international market, our major strategy is using the market destination representative in the key source market. We have our core markets, which has been the existing market for a long time, the international market. We have the German-speaking countries, we have UK and Ireland and North America. Beyond these core markets, we also have other emerging markets. So we do have representation in those source markets. So that is our core key strategy of bringing in the international visitors. But we also do physically, together with the private sector, participate in international tourism expos and road shows where we showcase what Uganda has to offer for those who might not be able to visit at any one time. But also, as Uganda Tourism Board, we have our own tourism expo, the Pearl of Africa Tourism Expo, POATE, and that is our signature tourism expo, which brings in not only the players within the country, but also the internationals at the regional level, East Africa, Africa as a continent, and the international as well. We do this. We do this through digital promotion as well. Digital marketing has become the trend, so we are not being left behind. We have various digital assets that we use to promote brand Uganda, destination Uganda, and we facilitate the private sector in different ways, including training, including taking them along when we are doing the marketing program, both regionally and internationally, including domestic. We have strategic partners we work with. We have a strong partnership with Uganda Airlines, UCC, just to mention the two among many others that we work with. Across the airlines as well, we work with very many of them internationally. Okay. So those are some of the ways that we carry out our mandate, but also very important is the documentation. We curate the content, through videos and photography, so that visually people can be able to appreciate what destination Uganda has.
Okay. Well, while you were speaking, what was running through my mind is the question on, truthfully speaking, who is easier to sell to, the foreigners or the Ugandans themselves? Because you're selling Uganda as a destination. I am already a Ugandan. Do I become easier to sell to, or the foreign tourists? In your experience, of course, with the work that you've been doing.
It's a lot easier to sell to Ugandans, depending on the approach that you are using. Okay. It could be either way, that they're actually equally the same, for the reason that the internationals who are willing to come to Africa and make a choice of Uganda have their mind set up. Yeah, and so long as you are able to position yourself and show them the beauty that Uganda has, it will be a lot faster for them to make the decision. Okay. For the Ugandans, I think the most important, the easiest way of doing it is to start with the school, the early age, children. What I am doing right now, I've been doing this for all my life, is because I started when I was very young, whether it's tourism, whether it's conservation. It becomes a lot easier when the children are exposed at the early age, to the interest of traveling and whatever else in terms of tourism and conservation. And I think that's in the wisdom of the government. That's why we have the Uganda Wildlife Education Center, to give the children the opportunity to start early. But even at the adult stage, depending on the interest, we have different interest groups, and so long as you target them accordingly, you will be able to convert them a lot easier. So
it's about the approach that you use to your target audience. All right, I'll be coming back to you. I would like to come to you, Paul. Talking about the Uganda Tourism Association and its mandate. Maybe some didn't even know that this association does exist. Please expound it more for us, especially the mandate and who you are, for someone out there who would like to probably even join.
Thank you, Mildred. Uganda Tourism Association is the apex body that brings together all the private sector tourism professionals.
Okay.
We have Uganda Association of Tour Operators, Uganda Safari Guides Association, Uganda Hotel Owners Association, the Uganda Association of Travel Agents. We have National Arts and Cultural Crafts Association of Uganda, NACAO. They're based at the National Theatre. We have the Association of Uganda Women in Tourism. We have the Hotel General Managers Association of Uganda. And we have the Uganda Community Tourism Association. And we're looking for UAC, which is a new MICE association, to join us. And we all represent tour operators, travel agents, community-based organizations, and membership is open to associations. So it's not individuals generally, but it's through the associations. And our main mandate is to lobby for better tourism business environment for our members. That's the reason why we have a good working relationship with all these tourism players who are present here. And they also actually, I like very much the fact that they do invite us for many policy discussions, for the budget support, and to find out, what is a priority for us in the next financial year, etc., etc. And we of course, we have a very, very, very healthy engagement with all my colleagues. I'll call them colleagues.
That's a plus.
Yes,
That's definitely a plus. Yes.
Because we like I said, we are of course in the private sector.
Yeah.
And to us, it's the bottom line that counts, and that's why we engage them very much to make sure that we try to leverage to make sure that, of course, we position Uganda in a better place and that we grow. And tourism has been growing until, of course, COVID-19 hit us last year. Yeah.
All right. You were talking about the private sector players coming together. We are looking at a COVID-19 that earlier on the PS talked about. How have you been affected as, the private sector, the Tourism Association? How have you been affected by this, and how are you planning to, step back?
Yes, that is not a very easy question, because the truth of the matter is tourism has been the hardest hit globally, not just Uganda, but globally. And for Uganda, of course, you've seen the results before COVID. It was 1.6. We were the highest foreign exchange earner for Uganda. And the tourism value chain is so long. A lot of people benefit and feed off tourism, either directly or indirectly. So I don't want to go down that route to see how many have actually been affected. What did Uganda Tourism Board do? We started this, to do our domestic tourism. And I'd like to please remind everyone that on the 4th of August last year, Uganda Tourism Association was at the helm of having a physical meeting at the Sheraton Hotel to lobby for the government to reopen Entebbe International Airport. How did that help us? It wasn't just tourism that was affected by the closure of the airport. It was the perception of the country, people were thinking Uganda is closed and we're not going to go there. So government heard our plea, and the 1st of October, the first Ugandan Airlines flight went to Nairobi to try and get back to where we were, to 2019, 2018 levels, and then to build on that is to be honest, is an uphill task. However, it's given us a time to pause and to reflect within ourselves and to see what strategy will best suit Uganda as a country. The chairperson of Uganda Tourism Board did, at the beginning of COVID, actually wrote an article in the New Vision that advocating for our tourism sites to be revamped. And I'd like to re-echo that message of his, because when we do open, once again, it would be nice to see a fresh look, something new, an addition, attraction, etc., than what we had, like same old, same old. It can't be the same because the situation is totally different now.
Okay. All right, I'll be coming back to you. And I think on that particularly, I will put it to the peers. What is government looking at now that we are opening up fully the revamp of the tourism sector? What key aspects is government putting in place for us to enjoy the beauty of the country? You talked about domestic tourists increasing. Are we still going to go to the same old places, looking the same, giving them the same kind of monies that have been, allocated to them? What new things is government looking at?
Well, government has a number of strategies, and I will later request Uganda Wildlife Authority and UTB to say something about that. But as a ministry, what we are focusing on is strategies that will help the sector to recover. And there are about 5 areas that we are looking at. One, of course, is through now doing more aggressive marketing, especially for the domestic tourism. And I think UTB will talk about some of the strategies that they have started on, like the campaigns, the domestic tourism campaigns that are already ongoing. Then there is the increasing the stock and quality of tourism infrastructure. And tourism infrastructure doesn't necessarily fall directly under the ministry, but we work with the other ministries and agencies. For example, we are now focusing on the tourism roads. And UNRWA is opening a number of these tourism roads, some of them using their own resources, but also getting funds from other development partners. So we are going, for example, to open and do the roads in the Gorilla Circuit. We are going to look at the airfields, and government is putting money into doing that so that we can have the different airfields in the different parts of the country. We are also looking at developing and diversifying the products, and that's partly what Paul was talking about. When you talk about tourism in Uganda, most of the time people think you are only promoting the national parks. But now we're looking towards diversifying the products. For example, we've been criticized for not promoting the equator, and yet there are not many countries that have the equator going through. So we are going to put some money in developing the equator points. We have already profiled them and about 20 points. And resources being available, at least we should work on a few each year so that, we can promote that as a product. We are looking at agro-tourism, we are looking at marine tourism. And so government is going to focus on diversifying the products that are available, both for the domestic tourists and the international. And the other area is developing the skilled manpower. We are now going to develop our schools, the tourism school, the hospitality school in Jinja, and the wildlife school in Kasese, so that we can have a pool of skilled manpower that can build the sector. And then finally is what UTB had talked about, enhancing the regulation, the coordination with the private sector, and making sure that we assure our visitors of quality and standards.
Okay, just how huge is the profiling task for the ministry and for the different sector players? And I know maybe UTB and WEP will be coming through, because it pains, for example, walking down the lane of the various pops that have visited Uganda, probably the sites they've been to, places they've knelt at. I've been to countries where they literally profile each and everything. When you look at, for example, the former leaders of the country, their homes, their burial grounds, and tracing down, that entire memory lane, looking at the lane, the entire trail of the Uganda matters, right from Chigungu all the way to where they were killed. When you try to look at some of the spots are underdeveloped or even under-profiled, what exactly is going on and how big is that task? And while you answer that, I will also ask Madame Ajarova here to respond to that. Some of those sites look under-profiled, for lack of a better word.
You are very right, and I would say that the biggest challenge really for the sector has been funding, and that should not, it's not always an excuse. We should do what we can with the little that we have, but I think it's beginning to become clearer that there is need to invest more resources in developing these sites. So if you looked at our policies and programs for the next few years, we have picked out a few of those sites, because we cannot do everything, of course, in a short time. But like the Matters Trail, and maybe UTB will talk about that, is one of the areas that we are looking at. So we need to invest. For example, we are now going to we are doing the regional tourism. I mean, the regional museums. I'll just give that as an example.
Okay.
We are going to start with the Uganda Museum. Many people maybe visit the Uganda Museum only when they are in primary school, but there's a lot that is in that museum that you cannot find anywhere. So, for example, the coming financial year, we are going to expand, we're going to modernize the museum, we're going to digitize, so that it can be, competitive regionally and internationally. And a few other sites, we have picked on a few sites like the hot springs. We are going to work on a few, I think Chitagata and the other one, the Sempire one. We are going to work on the equators. We are going to do some sites. We are working on the source of the Nile. That is a very big one for us. It has been on the plans for a long time. We have now completed a 20-year master plan. So we are going to start on infrastructure development. We are going to work on Kagulu, the rock. So a few sites that we have picked out for each planning period of about 5 years. But it's really work in progress.
Okay, maybe, and Lily, you will come up on that. Profiling for Uganda seems to be on a low scale.
Thank you, Mildred. Thank you, PS. Just to add on what she has said, the tourism master plan divides the country into 5 tourism development areas.
Okay.
So that is supposed to help us profile the country according to these 5 areas and be able to bring out all the tourism assets in the region, and then be able to have priority on what do we prioritize in developing in each of the tourism development areas, so that the whole country is developed with tourism. And very true, I want to emphasize the same, that the budget is our biggest factor. For us to be able to go across the country and be able to profile the tourism potential properly, it requires, a large sum of budget to be able to accomplish this. Again, we are not waiting until when we get that big budget. A number of profiling of the low-hanging fruits of the assets we have has been done, as already listed, enumerated. The equator, the marine, cultural tourism, agro-tourism. We already have an association of 62 farmers across the country who are already engaged in agro-tourism. So as we wait to have the opportunity to profile the whole country, there are things that are just very obvious that we can work with in the short run before we can be able to cover the whole country. Of course, we have depended for a long time on the national parks, and we have done very well in with the national parks, providing the destinations and experiences for all the tourists, both domestic and international, but it's high time. And also, I want to say thank you to the Ugandans who have picked interest and actually are now investing in tourism, and that's the way to go. Very important to appreciate is also that the government will only invest in the the big infrastructure, provide the required infrastructure and the social services that are required. We expect that the private sector have to come in if we have to fully utilize the potential that we have in developing tourism in Uganda to the level that it should be developed.
Okay, Dr. Msinguzi, let's talk about, because like it is said, charity begins at home. If we do not have the local people appreciating what we do have as a country, then there is no way we're going to go ahead and convince other people. I want to believe there's so many people living around Kamocha that have never visited, you know, the museum. There's so many people who haven't even been to many of these areas, not to even talk about protected areas or areas that are guarded like the Parliament of Uganda. How are we working as a country, one, to deal with education of the citizens right from the school age, like it has been suggested? How are we dealing with education institutions? Because also they're coming for just a period of time, you know, come visit, it's recreation, and they get away, but they may not get as much information as may be needed for a continuous education process. How are you working on that as a WEC?
Thank you very much, Mildred. Of course, education is the strongest tool you can use to change the world. And as our mandate of conservation education, what we have done is to actually segment the conservation education packages that we do offer. We have the lower, for example, kindergarten, primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we do this at UWEC in Entebbe. For example, for the period before the COVID, we were able to reach actually 320,000 Ugandans managed to be reached through them visiting the center, but also us also going to where they are. We are not waiting for them to come to the zoo, but we have set up a strong outreach conservation education to reach the schools, but also to go to the communities where these people are living. Now, we do also work with tertiary institutions where we have developed a curriculum for tertiary institutions. We've recruited human resource to cater for the different levels so that they can be able to package conservation-specific messages for the different audiences in order to achieve conservation action at an individual level. So don't wait for them at the center. We have established an outreach program where we do reach them out. But also, we have developed this education program which is interactive. So we go out to the schools, to the communities with videos and education materials that we do give out there. But also there is a grand plan by the government to set up satellite conservation wildlife education centers. As we talk, we are going to set up one in northern Uganda, eastern Uganda, and western Uganda, because we appreciate that not many Ugandans can come to Entebbe. We've been largely working in Entebbe, Kampala, and Jinja, but government has taken a deliberate decision to set up regional centers so that somebody in northern Uganda can be able to access conservation education in that area, can be able to appreciate the value of conserving biodiversity, can be able to bring the rescued wildlife to that area which is nearer to him or her for rehabilitation and release back into the world, as opposed to coming all the way to Entebbe. So that is going to be a very strong strategy for us to be able to reach the people, as opposed to us waiting for them to come. We are going to start with one center in eastern Uganda, particularly in Mbale, where we are going to get the best practices there and then replicate them in other areas. So the strategy is to reach them where they are, because not all of them can come to Entebbe. But of course also, we have intensified our marketing efforts, you know, as UWEC, in terms of using all our social media platforms, you know, reaching out to the people out there. We are carrying out webinars now, out of the innovation that we have actually coined from COVID-19. We are carrying out webinars with the schools, international schools, local schools, where we are able to reach out to the schools and also community areas. We are also acquiring a conservation education mobile rig van. This van is going to be moving as a caravan all over the country, where we are going to be spreading the gospel of conservation education focusing on environmental education and education for sustainable development all over the country. Of course, working with partners. We're not doing all this alone. We have strong partners as a result of our social capital. This was actually very, very key in helping us overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, because it was a very, very trying moment. So we have partners out there who have come up to partner with us to be able to reach the whole country through an outreach program as we reinforce what we have at the center, because people come in, they also receive us where we go to find them, and together working with partners, we shall create a multiplier effect. We're also working on a conservation education strategy for the country. The center was given the Uganda Life Conservation Education Center Act in 2015, which mandated them to carry out conservation education. So through that, we are the leading conservation education agency in the country. And now, right now, we are working on developing a robust conservation education strategy for the country. This is going to guide conservation education, working both digitally, but also by visiting the center, by going out. So it's going to combine all the activities and the strategies that we have in place. And of course, we are going to sell this to our various partners so that together we can achieve more.
All right, well, time is really fast running. We need to be taking our very fast break now, and yet the discussion is just starting. Already questions coming through of how the community gets to engage. The what is in it for me, that I normally say the WIIFM is the radio station that many people listen to the most. You're talking about conservation, but what is in it for me, the community gets to ask. Those are questions that we will be answering when we do return shortly from this commercial break. You're watching Spotlight UG.
The spectacular Pearl of Africa with so much to offer. From the lush green landscape to the unique variety of wildlife and dream destinations, all complemented by a population so famously hospitable. And yet, many continue to assert how all this is only bad potential and just suffered the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This Monday, the 29th of March 2021, the tourism sector goes under the spotlight under the theme Tourism to Date and its post-COVID-19 opportunities. The show will have Doreen Katusini, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Lily Ajarova, the Executive Director of the Uganda Tourism Board, Dr. James Musinguzi, the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Education Center, Paul Hoho Kakoza, President, Uganda Tourism Association, and Sam Wanda, the Executive Director of Uganda Wildlife Authority. Hosted by Mildred Tuhaise, Spotlight UG, live on UBC Television.
Kapo, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going to?
I'm gonna pay URA visit.
But you can access URA online. Why pay a visit?
To know more about the Kakasa business solutions, namely digital tracking solution, the voluntary disclosure program and electronic fiscal receipting and invoicing solution, which have turned my business around. You know I need to be on top of my game to protect my empire. If you know, you know.
I too need to know what Kapo knows.
Kakasa, be sure you are in charge of your business. Uganda Revenue Authority, developing Uganda together. Wait.
No one should stop you from finishing what's yours. That's why MTN gives you data bundles that don't expire. Load MTN Freedom Bundles using My MTN app and enjoy the freedom to finish your data bundles.
MTN.
That's their way of stopping HIV. What about you?
Today tastes like a new tradition, like an old favorite. Tastes like all hands on deck and all eyes on the prize. Today tastes like a piece of the action, and it never tasted this good.
It's no secret that ICT makes learning easy.
The strides made in our field could not be possible without it.
And now we can watch our favorite show.
My radio is my best friend.
UCC provides an enabling regulatory environment and policy guidance for healthy competition. We also facilitate ease of doing business in the communications sector through licensing, standardization, spectrum management, tariff regulation, rural communication development, and consumer empowerment. An informed consumer is an empowered consumer. UCC supports local content and innovations. Driving the development of a robust communication sector in Uganda is Uganda Communications Commission.
It's been a tough year. We could all use a restart, a reboot, a renewal. This Easter, turn to the one who can recharge, restart, and renew. Find hope in Jesus Christ. Celebrate Him. Feel new hope through music and inspired messages. Worship with us. Worship Him. Join us for Easter General Conference.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We are here.
Uganda, the spectacular pearl of Africa with so much to offer. From the lush green landscapes to the unique variety of wildlife and dream destinations, all complemented by a population so famously hospitable.
As Ugandans,
and yet
to actually
many
conserve and protect this God-given, beauty that can also be able to get us lots of income in the end. You're watching this on NBS television, broadcasting to you live from the Next Conference Center, that's Plot 13, Agoro Summit View, and also on Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, UBC TV, inspiring Uganda. The hashtag online is SpotLightUG as you get to engage and ask your questions as well, coming through as we host different sector players. UWEC is right with us. Uganda Tourism Association, the Uganda Tourism Board is as well with us. The Permanent Secretary to the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities is as well with us. Before we took a break, the main question of what is in it for me, that's what the communities, the surrounding communities to these protected areas, to the national parks get to ask. Just about last week was the sad story of 6 lions that were killed illegally, of course, for whatever reasons the persons had. But what was most heartening is the fact that these people probably do not even understand the value of what they're doing. Someone puts a life on the line for 40,000 shillings to kill 6 lions. And this goes to you, Mr. Sam Wanda, looking at the relationship between the communities and these conservation areas, just how much has been done by the authority.
Thank you very much, Mildred, again, and good evening again to our viewers and those online. The relationship between Uganda Wildlife Authority and the communities is a difficult one to explain, because we have some places where the relationship is extremely good.
Love-hate relationship you have?
No, really good. And then there are places where we have a love and hate relationship.
Okay.
The issues are many, but let me give you a few. As I mentioned earlier, we have wildlife in these national parks, in the reserves, many of which end up going out and destroying crops and livestock and sometimes killing people. That creates a problem because people then see them as an enemy and they would want to destroy them. That is one aspect. The other aspect is that this wildlife also makes good meat for some people. And culturally, some people use wild meat for various ceremonies, and we are trying to discourage that and tell them that a goat and a cow are equally good for those ceremonies. So that also causes a challenge. But on the good side is that we have activities, interventions that we have identified that are helping reduce this conflict. And I'll be explaining those a little bit later. But I need to also mention that we have people who want to use the wildlife as business. The ivory from the elephants, the paws, for example, of a lion or a leopard, which the people use in witchcraft. Those are some of the things that cause some of these animals to be killed and traded in, and then it causes us to clash with them in a way that is not good. So what we are doing, whereas Uganda Wildlife Education Center is the one responsible for conservation education, we must create a relationship with the community next to the protected areas. So we have programs of creating of awareness. We get into the villages, we talk to them, we explain issues, we work with them to generate interventions that will reduce the conflict resulting of wildlife getting out of the protected areas. Currently we've started doing electric fences. We already have about 56 kilometers of that along Queen Elizabeth and Maction Falls, but we will continue building onto that. Okay. We have done trenches. We do income generating projects like beekeeping, like growing of chili. And then in the law that sets up Uganda Wildlife Authority, we have a requirement that 20% of gate fees the people pay as they enter the parks goes to the communities. And we have over the years given over 20 billion shillings over the last 5 years to communities that neighbor the protected areas. Bwindi, Mugahinga probably getting the most because they get a lot more out of the gorillas, but also Queen Elizabeth and Maction Falls. So the communities develop projects that then they are able to implement out of the money that we have provided. So those are some of the ways in which we are trying to address the problem of the relationship. Okay. And as I've said, there are places where the relationship is good. There are places where we still need to do a lot of work.
Let's break it down.
On our side.
Let's break it down a little bit more. When you said 20% of get collections to the community, someone out there is thinking, okay, I'll be waiting and get some dollars, shared across. And when you talk about community activities, how do you get to select them? What is the criteria of benefiting from this money as the neighboring communities? And just how much have you done so far? What are some of those activities that you can be able to point out?
Very good question, because the 20% is for gate entrance into a national park. And what we currently have is the national parks that are having the highest number of visitors generate the highest revenue. Bwindi obviously generates the highest, not necessarily because it has the highest number, but because it's mountain gorillas, it's a premium product, and so the rates we receive from the gorillas are high, and we share higher because of that fact. And then Maction Falls follows, and then Queen Elizabeth, and then the others follow along the way. Now you're asking how is this shared? What happens is, let me give an example of Queen Elizabeth. I think it has about 8 districts around it, And so we look at those districts, look at the money is intended to go to the parishes that touch the boundary of the national park, because they are the ones having the blunt of the problems that relate to wildlife getting into their areas. So the parishes that neighbor, we count how many they are, and then look at the population in those parishes and look at the distance along the boundary, and we have a formula that relates to the population and the distance. The higher the population of the parish, the higher the distance, the higher the money they will receive. And then the parish itself, or in some cases the parishes have come together and worked as a sub-county, identify the projects they want to do out of the money, and then that is approved at the district level. That information is shared with us, and then we release the funds, because we would know. For example, Maction Falls, I think at the moment have about 2 billion shillings that we are holding, waiting for the projects to come. Okay. So when that money is looked at, it will be shared among the parishes that neighbor, and we will, when we say it is so much money, we already know, because we know the population, we know the distance, we already calculate how much the parish will receive. And so each parish is given, you are receiving 30 million, you are receiving 50 million, you are receiving this much, based on how much money is available and the population.
Who is helping these communities to come up with these projects? Because, for example, it might be a fishing community and all they know is fishing. It might be a herding community and all they know is we have our cows, we'll move around and look for pasture. They're probably not well educated on what sort of economic generating activities they can be able to do. Is that part of what you get to do, or you're just waiting for them to organize themselves and then the money will come? And if it takes forever, do we continue hoarding up this money?
What actually happens is that one, it's not correct that the communities don't know what they want. They actually do know what they want. They have leaders. Okay. But more importantly, both Uganda Wildlife Authority and the district, working with the sub-counties, work with the parishes to ensure that they're able to develop a proposal that is good and tangible and can support. And the kind of proposals that have come are really varied. We encourage them to look at income generating projects and conservation related projects. But we've also gotten people saying, no, for us, we have suffered with this road, going to town, we want the road done. Or we do not have a good school, we want a school done. Okay. Or we want a clinic. So it depends on what the community wants. But our real idea is that they should go income generating or something related to conservation. Okay. But when they make the decision, we do not stop them, because the thing is, it is their money. Okay. They must use it. Okay. And then we ensure that when the money is delivered, it actually does the work that is intended to do.
All right, thank you very much. I will be moved. All right, maybe the PS has something to add. Please go ahead, Doreen.
I was just adding that now at the ministry level, we actually do inspect. We send out teams to these places to go and see how these projects are doing. And like the ED was saying, we get varied different responses. Some projects are doing very well, some not very well. It also depends, I think, on the local leadership. So, like you were saying, some of these people really need guidance, and of course, UA cannot be in the parks, and also in the parishes overseeing these projects. But we also try to go out and look at all the projects that have been supported by UA, and they come back and write reports, and we also bring them to the attention of UA.
All right, thank you very much. And also just to note that the ED there, the tide, is definitely a representative of tourism. I can see some rhinos and elephants on the tide. Let me come to you, Paul. The other issue affecting domestic tourism, some of the complaints, of course, with the media reports coming through, are aspects of pricing, and that some of these products are too expensive. And also when they come to, for example, the hotels, they're being charged in dollars. I am earning in shillings, I'm being charged in dollars. The expenses, is it a discussion that as private tour operators in the country have had? And what needs to be done?
Indeed, there has been that discussion. That discussion is going on. But you will also find that we are catering, when we cater for the domestic because of this COVID time, when your hotel room goes on, your bed goes unslept in, your meal is not eaten, etc., etc. That's all wear and tear. And some of our members actually are paying, they've gone to the bank for mortgages on this property. So pricing in Uganda shillings is available. Please, all right? So we should not be frightened to ask and negotiate. That's number one. And speaking of domestic tourism, I've had this conversation with Uganda Airlines. You know, it's fantastic that we have our beautiful flying crane, as we call it. But as the private sector, we should have had domestic flights. Kenya, Tanzania are benefiting from the domestic flights. There is a huge appetite for domestic flights. I have one of my clients. He studies a weekend program in Mbarara. He's studying law because there's no weekend program for him in Makerere University. So he travels every Friday evening to Mbarara, sits in the classroom for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, and then comes back to Kampala by bus. So I asked him, supposing there was a flight, he said, I would be on it like a shot. So I would once again like to encourage powers that be, the ones responsible. Uganda Airlines is a fantastic thing. COVID has hit us very hard. We have imported big aircrafts that fly international routes without looking at the domestic market, for which there is a huge, huge appetite. Aerodromes are being renovated, as per the PS has told the new strategy. And trust me, if we had that, or even a helicopter going to Kalangala Island, you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed. That would really open up the country for domestic tourism, and that would really spur the growth. But I'd like to really encourage Ugandans, please, we will charge you our members will charge you in Uganda shillings, and it's negotiable.
I will stick to that exactly, because away from just being charged in a foreign currency, the cost itself for many of the Ugandans, they complain it's too high. Is it a discussion that you can be able to have with them? Because there are price determinants, of course. Maybe you need to explain that to them as well, to the Ugandans who would like to visit. But cost, away from just it being charged in foreign currency, remains an impediment for many to travel. They say, I cannot be paying maybe, say, 500,000 for a night, for just one night in a national park, say a hotel or cottage or whatever it is. And are we looking at the different packages, maybe tents, camping areas, that if I cannot afford a cottage, I could probably afford a tent?
Yes. All those facilities are available with UTM members. Get a good tour operator, and trust me, they will be able, they don't want you to leave the door, to leave with your money in your pocket. You must leave it behind.
Okay, all right. Negotiate is the key word.
Indeed.
Negotiate. For the Ugandans going to visit, use your negotiating skills, because I know they're really good. I want to come back to you from the Uganda Wildlife Authority. I will be coming back to you, Sam, much later on, but let me go to domestic tourism, and I'm going to you, Lily, domestic tourism remains a huge potential. 44 million people. Well, we'll say a greater percentage of those are young or people who are still dependent, but we can still tap from that particular audience. What are you doing? I've seen initiatives, for example, at the Table Mountain, South Africans celebrating their birthdays either have a very huge discount or will come for free, or their particular national holidays and stuff like that. What products are we putting in place to boost domestic tourism, to encourage Ugandans to visit these areas?
Thank you. There's actually quite a lot happening right now, and especially after the lockdown, that people needed to get out of their homes after the lockdown. And we're seeing a lot of interest in Ugandans wanting to travel. Not only those who have been traveling abroad, because we also have a class of Ugandans who have been traveling to Mombasa, to South Africa, to Dubai during the holiday times, and this time they have taken the opportunity to travel their own country. But we see a number of the young people who want adventurous activities.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are actually available, and we have them creating clubs, groups, and doing travels together. We have the mountain slayers, these are guys who are interested in hiking, climbing mountains. They do that once every month. They're going to a destination to do hiking. And as Uganda Tourism Board, and we are doing the campaign on the Take on the Pearl, and we have been able to coin these to fit different timelines and situations. Like we had Take on the Pearl with Love, Valentine time, and that is still also running on. And we have the Easter time coming, and this is dedicated for families. And we are highlighting Kalangala, this time for family destinations. And we have the campaign running for those who are participating in providing the photos that we are asking for, because this is a digitally led campaign. So those who are participating on our social media, they know that the next trip, which is next weekend, the Easter weekend, is going to be for the families who are winning these trips and going to Kalangala. So the campaigns are going on, and a number of other things that are happening is also we are coming up with packages around the public holiday times. Like Independence Day, we should all be looking up for that, because we are trying to think more creatively to see that this year, Independence Day, we have special offers. I also want to appreciate the private sector players, because they have come in a very, to supplement our effort with these campaigns. They have been offering special packages, not just only the tour operators, but accommodation owners during these special times, the holidays, Christmas time. I was in Queen Elizabeth up to yesterday, and I was trying to ask around at the different lodges. They're all fully booked. They're all fully booked for Easter weekend already. So for us, that is really very good. It's impressive that Ugandans now have the necessary information of places where they can visit. And we'll continue with these efforts, but also in the recent past, we have had, it's important for me to mention that we are not doing this alone. Just as the players in the sector, we have also had developmental partners come on board. UNDP sponsored the Rwenzori expedition that we did in December, and we appreciate them for that. And we have been able to support the different initiatives from the private sector as Uganda Tourism Board. We have supported the Royal Ascot Goat Race, Kaguru Hill Challenge, climbing challenge, which is done every year except for last year because of COVID, of course. The Uganda International Fashion Week, a Choto Cultural and Food Festival, Miss Tourism, Miss Uganda Beauty Pageants, the World Tourism Day, Rolex, so there are all these initiatives that has been going on and that we have been supporting. That in itself is a way of creating awareness for the domestic market so that they are able to know what they can do, what they can experience in different places, but also not just about nature, food, the culture, and all that. So, I believe that some could actually add on to this in terms of numbers, because we are just setting up a system in which we can capture data from the destinations outside the national parks. But I know that Uganda Wildlife Authority has the system where they capture all the numbers of the visitors going into the national parks with their categories, whether they are internationals, domestic, children, East African. So he might be able to give us numbers, but I believe that from what has been happening within the last 1 year, there is quite a lot in terms of the growth in domestic tourism because of the awareness, because of the price structuring. Yes, you are saying price has been an issue, but the private sector have been very generous in some of the destinations that they have had to cut down their prices. I know that there are people who couldn't believe that they could spend a weekend, in some of the lodges for a full weekend for 300,000. For those who took the opportunity to travel, they have actually enjoyed this special rates.
Offers coming through.
Yes.
All right. And East Africa is another, region to focus on. When you talked about our main destinations and you were talking about UK, Germany, Ireland, I was asking myself, where is Kenya? Where is Tanzania? Because these are our immediate neighbors. And the question is it that we have the same kind of tourism products, or we just haven't reached out a lot? What is the status of our regional neighbors?
No, actually, if we look at international arrivals and we count even the neighboring countries, our biggest arrivals are from Kenya. They are our number one source market.
Okay.
So just to say as well, we have our markets. Our markets are divided into 4. We have the international markets of the existing one and the emerging one that I mentioned about.
Okay.
And then we have the East African markets. Yeah. Then we have the Africa, the continent, because we also have a lot of interest from people from South Africa who are traveling to this country. Egypt is coming up. Ethiopia is coming up. Nigeria is coming up quite a lot because of the faith-based tourism. Uganda Matters is a big thing for the West Africans. So we are targeting those as well. And as we talk now, the plan in the next few months is also to get market destination representatives in those markets within Africa as well.
Okay.
So our 4th market is, of course, the domestic market. So those are our 4 markets, and we are not leaving any behind. We already in the domestic market, we have agencies that we are working with. I think for some who know Talent Africa, we have been working with them within the last 1 year to do the experiential domestic tourism campaign of Take on the Pearl. And for the regional, both East Africa, Africa as a continent, and international, we are using the market destination representative. Not only that, but also key personalities as influencers. As you're aware, we have signed up on some of the key personalities to help us in our promotional efforts. We have our sportsman, homebred Cheptegei Joshua, who is doing a great job. We have Eddie Kenzo, who is also another one, with the different audiences, both domestically but internationally as well, and within the region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I want to come to the Permanent Secretary again. Doreen, there are a number of projects under the Ministry of Tourism, and one key project that I picked interest in is the Handcraft and Souvenir Development Project. How far with this? How helpful is it? And how are we bringing on board the locals to be a part of such projects? Because from each and every country there is a souvenir that would identify that country, that when I come with it, someone will be able to tell that you got that from South Africa, you got that from China, that's from India, that's from this particular country. How are we working with this project?
First of all, I'm quite glad that you picked on that project, because it's, of all the projects, it's quite a small project, but one of a kind. It's the very first project that we have as a ministry targeting handicrafts and souvenirs. It is a 3-year project, and with a funding of about $1.5 million as a grant. Now, that project is really focusing on communities and groups that are in the business of handicrafts and souvenirs. So what we did as soon as we received this funding, we did a baseline survey. So we sent out teams to look at the different groups, and we were most interested, especially in those that are close to the protected areas, because we have a number of groups, say in Bwindi, Makshon, groups that are into crafts that target tourists, of course, both domestic and international. So we wanted to see what these groups are doing, how organized they are, what tools do they have, what kind of needs they have. And so we were able to make a report, and that has informed other activities that have followed on. Just as we speak now, there is a team that has been undergoing training here. So we have come up with training programs for the different teams in leadership, in governance, but also practical training in terms of developing the quality of the crafts. We, like you said, we want to get to that point where we have a standard. We are developing standards, working with you, with the National Bureau of Standards, to develop standards for crafts. And we are starting with about 7 of them, so that we can have handicrafts and which are competitive, but like you said, somebody can see and know that this is from Uganda. Just like you see something and you know that is from South Africa or this is from Kenya. So that is what we are targeting. We are working with these groups. Of course, in most cases, they are really women groups, and we are glad to work with the women and the youth. We have groups all over. We are targeting all the regions of Uganda. So this time we had groups from Pakwach, from Masindi, from Tororo, from Wakiso. So we are looking at different groups and focusing on particular crafts. So you have groups, for example, that are making drums. There are groups that are making baskets. There are groups that are doing leather work. So we are targeting the different groups, and we want in the long run to assist them to develop the centers, the production centers. Give them tools, rehabilitate or build a few centers where they can do this. So it's about training, it's about developing quality and standards, and branding. We want to brand the crafts.
Also, away from the projects, the policies that the ministry is looking at. And still what caught my attention was the museum and monuments policy 2015, emanating from a story that we covered as NBS television on some of the land where these monuments exist being encroached on. Some people do not even know where these monuments exist apart from looking at them on the monies, on the notes, currency notes that we do have. How does this policy work, and what's its implementation like?
In addition to the policy, actually, we have a law, but this law is quite outdated. We have a law that dates back to 1964, but we are now in the process of developing the Museums and Monuments Bill, which is actually before Cabinet. After that, it will go to Parliament. But we have looked at the different sites, and the sites that we have identified that would be of interest are over 600 sites. Okay. And like you rightly said, there are issues of land ownership. So we have prioritized acquiring this land and getting titles. So in our budgets for every financial year, this year, for example, we are going to get 25 titles. We already have a number of them, of course. But, and I want to thank the local governments. We have been getting a lot of support from local governments where we are identifying sites and we want to secure that land. Of course, sometimes we find there's a lot of encroachment or titles have already been given out. But it's one of our priorities to get titles and secure this land so that we can be able to actually develop the sites for interest, for tourism, and even just for our own heritage and conservation of our heritage.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me come to WEC, and looking at Dr. Msinguzi, I mean, the people who love pets, and sometimes some have taken it a notch higher from just petting what we would probably consider domestic animals to petting even the wild animals. One wants to have a tortoise in the home, one wants to have maybe some monkeys. How does this work? And for such a Ugandan, how do they relate? And what's your policy as you work?
Thank you very much, Mildred. Actually, this emanates from the Wildlife Act 2019. There is now a provision for one to own a pet, and the process is actually to apply to the Uganda Wildlife Authority. The Uganda Wildlife Act 2019 provides for sustainable wildlife utilization, where it allows or it provides for what we call wildlife user rights. Wildlife user rights, one can do game ranching, you can acquire wildlife for education, you can acquire wildlife as a pet. So you get the authority or the license from the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and then working in partnership, we do the training because we manage captive wildlife. And so we do the training for the person who is going to handle the pet. We also, working with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, provide the pet depending on what the Wildlife Authority has decided, because there is a ban on wild caught. We don't allow capturing from the wild, so we go to captivity. So the policy and the decision making is at the level of the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and for us we do the training and provision of the pet, but it is provided for under the law in order to promote sustainable wildlife utilization, creation of jobs, and all that.
And part of your mandate also is to have the wildlife, what is called the Wildlife Biobank.
Yes.
For Ugandan out there, if you could just break it down for them, what is that bank, and is it in existence anyway?
The biobank is not yet in existence, but what it takes is that we want to have tissues of wild animals out there in the wild and bank them in order to have an insurance population. Should we have a problem, God forbid, for example, a particular species, gets a problem in the wild and the number dwindles very much or nears even extinction, we should be able to go to the archives into our bank. This is a bank of biological tissues as opposed to a bank of banknotes, where you get out these tissues or where you can be able to replicate more of these animals and reintroduce them back into the world or make them available, as opposed to letting them become extinct. The bank is not yet in existence, but we're working on it, working with partners. As the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, we are members of the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquaria. In fact, we are privileged to be chairing that organization for all zoos and aquariums in Africa. And so working with our partners in Germany and South Africa, we are reaching an agreement to be able to get technical expertise, because we don't have that currently. And this is one of the benefits that we have actually benefited as the Wildlife Center, that being a member of this association, we can be able to get technical capacity built in the various zoos in the region, in Europe and North America. So working with our partners from South Africa, we are in advanced stages and discussion of actually bringing on board technical expertise, because government through the SEDEP World Bank project is going to work on this in terms of the building, but the technical capacity, we shall have it from our counterpart zoos in South Africa. We are already in advanced stages.
All right. Thank you very much. Sam, I'm coming to you. You part of your mandate is, conserving and managing these national parks and then the wildlife reserves that are in Uganda. We are out of a COVID-19, lockdown, trying to get back on our feet. Part of what was in the news is that probably what this helped is that the animals did do a lot of recreation during that period. So probably we have a little bit more of numbers. But what is the state of our national parks, realistically speaking?
Thank you, Mildred. There are two things. Yes, the wildlife were increasing, but they were not affected by COVID. So we don't expect that increase to be any different from what was already going on. But as I did mention earlier, most of our wildlife numbers have gone up. Buffalo, elephants, mountain gorilla, Uganda kob, giraffe, everything has gone up. Even the lone antelope that we almost had lost, when you go to Pianupe Wildlife Reserve now, you will find lots of them easily seen grazing in that reserve. So the numbers have continued to go high.
On a lighter note, someone out there is asking, is it because we weren't visiting and disturbing the procreation system, and we made it a little bit more of that?
No, because
what explains that anyway?
What explains that is that Uganda Wildlife Authority over the last 15, 20 years has been doing a good job creating awareness among the people so that they are not hunting and killing the wildlife, but also protecting by law enforcement to ensure that those that are there are protected and are not killed. So we are doing it both ways. Getting the people to know that it's useful to protect and not kill, but also ensuring that those who want to kill are prevented from doing so. But I wanted to just talk about the pricing that you asked the president of UTA, whereas they manage the hotels and lodges, we manage the entrance into the parks. We, since December the 1st, have provided a reduction in entry in any of our parks or reserves, and we've cut that figure by 50%.
Wow, that's lovely.
And for Uganda 20 National Park, it's only 20,000 shillings. Meaning right now you can enter at 10,000 shillings a day. And that will continue up to June the 30th. Okay. And there are ranges of accommodation available, from camping to bandas that we manage as UWA. And then when you get to the lodges, then we bring in the private sector because they do what I would call the high end. For us, we do what the Ugandan should fit in if they don't have the resources, big resources. They should be able to get in there. If you go to Kidebo, for example, you can get a bed at only 40,000 shillings. So it's possible for Ugandan to visit some of these places.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add that bit there. Then Lily was referring to me for the numbers.
Yes, yes.
Actually, we have the foreigners, and I was just checking my figures on the phone here. I expected that the numbers of foreigners has reduced, but it has remained the same. We are at 50-50 in the numbers of people getting into our protected areas. 50% Ugandans and East Africans, we categorize them as one, and 50% foreigners. So even in the year 2000, when we had a lockdown for quite a number of months, we remained at 50-50, which is quite surprising. Though the total number of visitors in the national parks dropped by up to 30%, because we were having over 300,000 a year. We could only manage 100,000 last year.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Paul, coming to you. The government and private sector discussion sometimes gets a little bit frictious when it comes to issues of taxes and what government has done to be able to get these taxes, basically providing an enabling environment. What more do you think government needs to do? You've made some suggestions, of course, working on the infrastructure, having some of these flights, which I totally believe are very good aspects to deal with. What more do you think government needs to do to provide a great working environment between the private sector and themselves?
Thank you, Mildred. Indeed, we already have some tax waivers, for example, on importation of tourist vehicles, as well as importation of hotel materials for, to construct your hotel or your tourism lodge. However, COVID is a very new phenomenon that has come and hit us unawares, caught all of us unawares. There was a so-called stimulus package that was being negotiated actually through Ministry of Finance with the EU and UDB. So after almost a lot of deliberations, and as the chairperson of OHOA said, you're going to give us a stimulus package when the patient has died.
Sure.
And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Very late, and interest of 8%, and you kind of like take a loan to keep your staff working. However, they don't have a job, but you kind of like, to me, that was very bad business. That's the truth. We've not been handed, as an industry, as a private sector, we've not been supported as much as, for example, Kenya or even Tanzania. Understandably, before, of course, the government will want to give a waiver on certain taxes. They want to know that we are tax compliant. Even the companies that are tax compliant have not received any assistance from the government. Being a sector that has contributed the highest amount to the GDP, I think we really, now is the time for government, Ministry of Finance, to look at us and say, maybe with URA, we give you a waiver on taxes, because what happened during the 2020, you were allowed to deduct your employees' PAYE and NSSF, but this was just deferred for 3 months. You could use that money as working capital, but you still had that financial liability. So, me as a business, I chose to actually pay it. Why? Because I know 3 months down the road, URA is going to come for its money.
Yeah.
So they really, in truth, they actually was, I'll call it, it was piecemeal.
Okay.
And it has not helped us. And we are actually on our knees. And it's something which I again want to talk about. We're such a valuable sector. We're a very, very valuable sector. And now is the time we need help, because we are on drip feed.
Okay.
Fact.
Well, our time is really getting fast spent, but maybe before I just leave you, how do you see yourselves as UTA, as private operators in the next few months? Because we're now, slowly by slowly getting to fully open up, get used to the fact of living with COVID-19, and also have you trained enough the operators to ensure that all these standard operating procedures and the safeguard mechanisms are put in place?
Yes, I'd like to say this was, I think, the first industry to actually have SOPs in place, because we had to open the airport by the 1st of October. So there was no way we would have done that without the SOPs being in place, right? So I'd like to say, like, from the 4th of August last year, we had SOPs developed. But what we would like as an East African kind of thing is that we harmonize these SOPs, and we harmonize, because COVID is not going to leave us tomorrow. not the day after. How are we going to live with COVID and best do it? We want to also encourage that, through the East African Tourism Platform, that as governments come together, let them standardize certain things. We've seen some baby steps towards it. For Uganda, before you could come to into Uganda, it was 72 hours, your PCR negative test, and now it's been increased to 120, like in Rwanda. Kenya is still at 96, and of course Tanzania officially has no COVID. But these are little baby steps that we need to harmonize as a region, and then market ourselves as a region, market to each other, because apart from domestic tourism, we should be able to move within the region, to visit within the region, and to have our money move around the region first, before we can even look to the international market.
Thank you very much, Paul. Dr. Musinguzi, as well as we also get to the close, many people are still wondering how you managed to look after all those animals through COVID-19 and how you safeguarded them, because there was a lot of news of, animals in parks, animals in zoos getting infected with COVID-19. You would answer that, but also how do you intend to hit back after, this COVID lockdown and the distress it brought?
Good question. Like I said earlier, the social capital that we have built over the years was a great asset in helping us navigate through the tough times of COVID-19. People brought us food, we got donations in kind, donation in cash, up to the tune of about 108 million. Definitely government came in because we gave in an SOS, and some stimulus package was given to us to feed these animals. But most importantly, I want to thank the Ugandans out there, because they listened to us, particularly so much the Indian Association of Uganda. They would bring food every day, and this helped us to navigate through the COVID-19. But also, I want to say that this pandemic has actually brought on board so many innovations, and as we bounce back, I want to tell you right now that you can have a virtual tour of the zoo in Uganda online. It is online available. We are going cashless. We have cash payment, but we are phasing it out, because you can pay by mobile money now. You can pay using your card, and eventually that will be removed completely, so that we completely go cashless. We can now teach online through webinars, which is actually active and a very inspiring tool. We are also having online donations, which are coming through as a result of our aggressive online marketing. But I also want to say, Mildred, that we are privileged at the moment to be the best zoo in East, West, and Central Africa. And this was done or arrived at after an audit that was carried out by the Pan-African Zoo Association. Now, this positioning is actually helping us to catapult us into being on top, innovating more tourism products. I want to tell you that where we are going, we are introducing a tour van within the center. We are also having satellite centers built, like I said. We are also having a double-decker boat, which is going to be introduced within the center. We are having golf carts. There are people who come to the zoo and they don't want to walk. They come with their elderly. There are some who are disabled. They can ride around using golf carts. They can ride around using the tour van that's going to be introduced. So there is quite a lot that is coming on board. We are also introducing or starting to work on a freshwater fish aquarium, where we can have the fish of Lake Victoria exhibited at the center in Entebbe, so that we use that to actually teach about the conservation of Lake Victoria, but also for recreation. If you have been to zoos elsewhere or aquaria, people make big weddings in aquaria, and that generates a lot of income. At the moment, we have the longest beach line in Entebbe, and we have actually developed it to make sure that we host more weddings, more parties. The zoo in Entebbe is a place where you can come on a Friday, stay, eat, drink, and then go after some days, because we have affordable accommodation, which is actually cheap. Like other facilities, you can have a double cottage at 100,000 shillings a night. Yes. We also have dormitories, we have apartments, we have camping. So it is segmented to fit and suit all the various Ugandans who want to travel. And Ugandans adults enter only 10,000 shillings to enter the zoo, and children only 5,000. So we are determined to bounce back through all those innovations and working with the partners. I want to take this opportunity to thank all our partners who have worked very much with us. And like I was talking about the biobank, the genetic material that is going to be biobanked is actually also going to enhance research. So there's quite a lot that we are trying to do. What I want to tell Ugandans out there and non-Ugandans who are watching us is that the zoo is no longer a place where you just come and see the animals, but you come, study about them, but also get recreation so that you go out with a great experience. So we welcome them, let them come and visit their country. Thank you.
Interesting just how much COVID has taught us and, you know, the opportunities it has brought. Lily, I'm coming to you, and as you give your closing remarks and also tell us about the projections, what are you looking at? There is the discussion between product development and product diversification when we get to talk about tourism. That has always come up in the media, and people are asking, what's the difference between the two? Break that down for us and also give us your projections as UTB in the future.
Thank you very much. Product development, like I earlier said, we have been dependent on the nature-based tourism, and it's there's still a lot more to experience with nature, but it's time to diversify into the different areas. And I talked earlier about agro-tourism. We are looking at infrastructure tourism. We are in partnership with Uganda Electricity Generation Company Limited. Okay. You know, Isimba Karuma has amazing product to offer to experience at the dam. When you take a tour at the dam, the infrastructure, the whole setup, and the views around the rivers is awesome. So those are some of the new products that are being developed. And we have also looked at the fact that there are opportunities of developing different products across the sector. We are talking about infrastructure, we are talking about culture, we are talking about the history of different things and places. Literally, tourism will fit with any of the sector. Okay. And very important as we move forward. I already mentioned our signature event, Pearl of Africa Tourism Expo, is taking place from 27th to 29th of April 2021. It's a virtual event. Go to www.powate.co.ug and you'll be able to get information, register as an exhibitor to showcase what you have to offer, register to learn. We will be having seminars. You will be able to understand and be educated on how you can actually invest in tourism, how you can join in, become a player in the tourism sector. We will be having international participants where we will have the operators have business-to-business engagement. And with all these, we project that in the next year, we should be able to have better business, as also vaccinations are being given both in the country and internationally. Things are, you know, everyone is beginning to gain more confidence. The other confidence we have also as a destination, Uganda government acted in a very timely manner, you know, with getting us into the lockdown. And Paul already mentioned we had our SOP done very fast, and we have been highly rated because of that as a destination. Okay. So as things are beginning to pick up, tourism is restarting. One thing I believe personally is that as a destination, Uganda is going to move very fast in terms of getting numbers coming in because of the actions we took in a very timely manner. And at some point, we were rated the #1 country in Africa that actually controlled, you know, the spread of COVID. And that has remained in the minds of different people. So once they are ready to travel, they will definitely choose Uganda as one of the destinations to come to. And very important as well to inform the public and the players in the tourism sector is that Uganda Tourism Board is also mandated to regulate the sector in terms of setting standards.
Okay.
And we have to register your business. We have to license you for you to be operating legally. If you are not registered with us, you haven't got a license from us, you're actually operating illegally. So as soon as possible, get to the website of Uganda Tourism Board. You can fill in the registration online or come to our offices. We'll help you get through that and be able to license you. And tomorrow we are starting on training for assessors who will be helping us to classify and grade the accommodation facilities.
Okay.
Grading the accommodation facilities is one big marketing tool for us, because internationally, if you do not have graded hotels, some of the international travelers will not even look at your destination. So it's important for us to take some of these actions to be a competitive destination.
All right. Thank you very much, Lily. Our time is really fast spent. I'll have Sam and the PS finally. Sam, as you get to speak to us, I know you were as well hit by COVID as UA, and you cut up on some of your projects, including all the capital projects that were suspended. How do you intend to bounce back, especially on the aspect of revenues, since you get your revenues from the other key players?
Thank you. Probably I need to first appreciate those who have supported us as individuals, as the private sector and government partners, because I was just looking at the figures a few days ago, and we've probably gotten support of over $1 million that has helped us to keep running. And we also had to replan. Whereas we had an approved budget and work plan, we had to cut back and focus on a few things, and basically 3 things. One, that we would maintain every single staff we had and would be able to pay them a salary in time. 2, that we prevent everything illegal in our national parks. 3, that we deal with human-wildlife conflict, and we've been able to do that for the period of since the lockdown, and we are still running strong. Our resources are obviously limited. We have talked to our ministry, and ministry is also linking us to Ministry of Finance to see how best we can have additional funding that can enable us go through this process. But just looking at the figures of July to September, our revenue was 5% of what we were earning previously. But when we went up to December, it had risen up 12%. We believe that by the time we end this month and look at the figures, they should be in the 20% figure. And so it means we're already growing, and we hope that that growth will continue, and hopefully by December this year we'll be back on the levels we were before COVID. And that should help us to implement all our activities and start implementing even those that are capital in nature.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sam. And I will now end off with the PS, Ministry of Tourism. As a ministry, of course, which will be dealing with all these other key sector players, what is your bounce back plan? What are you looking at as government?
Thank you very much. Maybe just to build on to what Sam has just said, like I said at the beginning, we are seeing very good signs of recovery. And I wanted to tell everyone who's listening and watching us that we have a saying in the sector that tourism is everyone's business. Maybe I should add that conservation is everyone's business.
Sure.
Because it's not only us as a ministry that need to do what we do. We work with the private sector, we work with all the partners that are supporting tourism, but we have a lot of goodwill from several partners that are supporting the recovery programs. You had the EDU talking about the project that is going to support their infrastructure development. We are getting support from the World Bank. We are getting support from several other partners, the European Union, to support conservation, to support recovery of tourism. So we also believe that now that the COVID pandemic is we are beginning, I think, to see the recovery now with the vaccination. But also, like Lily was saying, I think I would be right to say Uganda is one of the safest places right now. The fact that we managed the pandemic very early and managed it very well, we have seen the numbers go down tremendously. We are hearing stories of some of the wards being closed. So we believe that our recovery is probably going to be faster than we had anticipated. So we encourage our visitors, regional, domestic, and international, to visit Uganda because it's quite safe. And we believe that in the next probably 1 year or 2 years, but government is doing everything possible because tourism has been prioritized as one of the key productive sectors in the National Development Plan. So we are very hopeful that the recovery will be faster.
All right. Thank you very much. It's only time. We should have continued with this discussion because, of course, it's one that does not need a huge input, but of course needs quite a lot to be able to spur its growth, but yet it has great potential of contributing to the economy of the country. But that is all that time could allow us take through. Thank you very much to the Permanent Secretary of the Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, that is Doreen Silva Katsime. It's been a pleasure sparing 2 hours of your night with you. The President of the Uganda Tourism Association, Paul Kakoza, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I hope government did hear all that, and we will be expecting a response in the shortest time possible. To the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Education and Conservation Center, Dr. James Musinguzi, it's a pleasure having you. The CEO of the Uganda Tourism Board, Lily Ajarova, 2 great hours. It was just a very short period of time. We should have continued to talk about Uganda's beauty. And finally, the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Authority, Mr. Sam Wanda. It's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue with this discussion on hashtag SpotLightUG. Thank you very much, Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, for enabling this come through, and NBS Television. I am Mildred Tohaise. I can officially say good morning because it's a Tuesday.
Landscapes to the unique variety of wildlife and dream destinations, all complemented by a population so famously hospitable. And yet, many continue to assert how all this is only bad potential and just suffered the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This Monday, the 29th of March 2021, the tourism sector goes under the spotlight under the theme Tourism to Date and its post-COVID-19 opportunities. The show will have Doreen Katusime, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Lily Ajarova, the Executive Director of the Uganda Tourism Board, Dr. James Musinguzi, the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Education Center, Paul Hoho Kakoza, President, Uganda Tourism Association, and Sam Wanda, the Executive Director of Uganda Wildlife Authority. Hosted by Mildred Tohaise, SpotLightUG, live on UBC Television.
It's been a tough year. We could all use a restart, a reboot,